Hi there, and welcome back to our Starsector pirate campaign. So at the end of the last episode, we encountered a domain-era cryosleeper and defeated the Guardian. For those who don't know, the cryosleeper is a special encounter that occurs twice per sector, and any colonies founded within 10 light-years of a cryosleeper can construct a special facility that dramatically increases their population growth. I still don't know if we're actually going to found any colonies during this playthrough, but it's nice to have found the cryosleeper nonetheless. We also discovered the probe that Alvis sent us out here to find, and having completed all of our tasks in this part of the sector, I decided that we might as well go ahead and do a little bit of exploring. We just so happened to be fairly close to a black hole system, and, at least anecdotally, from both my experience and the experiences of other players that I've interacted with, it seems that black hole and neutron star systems have an unusually high chance of spawning research stations. So now we've jumped into that black hole system, and I'm going to be using neutrino detector and active sensor bursts, just to see what we can see. If we happen to find a research station, great. But if not, I'll just follow the pings and any leads we find, and I'll make a brief tour of this constellation before we head back to Galatia. As you can see, we've already found a domain-era probe, which should provide a nice little boost to our supplies and fuel, so we can do a little bit more exploring out here if we want to. And of course we're going to want to check this debris field to see if there's any more resources lying around. If you're particularly averse to watching us fly around and maybe occasionally taking a small fight against some domain-era defenders, I'll leave a timestamp in the description for when we pick back up with Alvis at Galatia Academy. Still here? Well, alright then. So I was recently trolling through the Starsector Reddit, as I often do, and I encountered a query that I find comes up quite often, which is, are there any tips or tricks around combat for new players? Well, I thought about it for a bit, and the response that I came up with at the time was around the two different control schemes that are used in combat in Starsector. Both control schemes use the standard WASD keyboard controls, but they handle quite differently in combat, and holding shift toggles between them. So normally you'll be using the default control scheme, but holding down shift will allow you to use the other one at will. And the major difference between the two is that by default, pressing A or D will rotate your ship clockwise or counterclockwise, whereas the strafe and turn to cursor control scheme turns your ship to always face towards the mouse cursor, and A and D function to strafe your ship left and right. And this is my preferred control scheme in combat, and in fact changing to this control scheme was the single biggest factor in improving my piloting skills when I first started playing the game, which I stated as such in my response on Reddit. As an aside, you can set strafe and turn to cursor as the default control scheme within the game settings, and this will save you from having to hold down shift all the time if, like me, you prefer this control scheme. Unfortunately for me, I've gotten so used to holding down shift in combat now that when I'm not holding down shift in a fight, my pinky finger just sort of floats awkwardly in midair, feeling useless. Anyway, after I posted my reply on Reddit, I spent some more time thinking about what advice I might give to a new player just starting out. And I ended up coming back to something that I wrote in response to a comment on one of the earlier videos in this series, which is that while your knowledge of the game will increase the more time you spend playing, making good decisions will always matter. And I wanted to elaborate on this a little bit because it's a bit of a general statement, and that may not be all that helpful to a new player as they don't have any sort of contextual framework in which to place that sort of advice. So the following is a list of items that I think it would be helpful for a new player to pay attention to. And I've placed them into a specific order because I feel like the things that are at the top of this list feed into items that appear later in the list. So with that said, the first thing on the list is pause often. When you're first starting out, combat is going to bombard you with a whole lot of information that you may not know what to do with. But the simple solution to this is to just stop and read. It's a single player game, so you're really not inconveniencing anyone by taking a moment to gather your wits and get a better sense of what's going on around you. You can hover your mouse over an enemy and press R to show more detailed information. In particular, pay attention to what weapons they have equipped. See which weapon slots those weapons have been placed in, and start learning to recognize those weapons when they appear on your enemies. Many of the most impactful weapons have a very distinctive sound or appearance to them. For example, sabos have a very distinctive zip sound as they're being launched, while Reaper torpedoes have that ominous red glow to them. Once you've gotten the hang of recognizing the most common and most dangerous threats, you'll be ready for the next few things. The first of which is vent early and often. Starsector AI can be less than intuitive in many regards, but something that the enemy AI does with at least some consistency is capitalizing on perceived weakness. So if your flux is nearly maxed out, or worse still, you've become overloaded, don't be surprised when the enemy ships around you take that opportunity to fire all of their missiles. To avoid this sort of situation, you can vent, even in the middle of a firefight. It's better to do this earlier rather than later, as, unless you have safety overrides, once you start venting, you're locked in and vulnerable until your flux hits 0. But the amount of time that you spend in this vulnerable state will be much shorter if you didn't have much flux to vent in the first place. So try to vent in short spurts while your flux is still low, rather than all at once when you're nearly maxed out. And this is where having good awareness of the weapons you're facing comes in really handy, because that'll help you make good decisions about which weapons you definitely want to have your shields up for, and which you can safely take on your armor without suffering too much damage. For example, you might willingly opt to take some autocannon shots to the face in order to close distance and save your flux for when the enemy gets desperate and decides to fire everything. This is much preferable to withdrawing after nearly overloading and then finding many more harpoon missiles heading towards your face than your shields can reasonably handle. The other thing is watch your tail, which is to say protect your engines. I've said it before and I'll say it again, losing thrust control may be the most dangerous thing that can happen to you during a fight. In many regards it's worse than overloading, because at least when you're overloaded you have the ability to maneuver around and use allied ships as cover. But if your engines stop working and you suddenly find yourself slowly drifting towards an onslaught's forward fire arc, don't be surprised if your friends decide not to volunteer to be your blade of armor. This again is where being able to recognize weapons will help you. In particular, you'll want to watch out for salamander missiles. They're fairly robust, have excellent tracking, and can knock out most engines in just 1 or 2 hits. You'll typically find them trying to circle around you in order to find the gap in your shield coverage. And this again is a situation in which deciding to selectively lower your shields can be helpful, as salamanders will often go for any unshielded part of your ship if they find your engines to be hard to reach. As salamanders do almost no hull damage, it's almost always preferable to let them disable one of your weapons than risk a potentially deadly flameout. So, in summary, make good decisions. Know thine enemy, know thyself, and, in the immortal words of Sun Tzu, don't be afraid to take an autocannon to the face. Another thing I wanted to mention are the rules of this salvage-only run. I already went over the rules in the very first episode of this series, but I wanted to elaborate on a couple of things to avoid any confusion in the future. So when I started the campaign, the rules were only take ships from post-battle salvage, nothing from the market or from exploration. In addition, no purchasing of weapons, hull mods, or blueprints, only resources and commodities like supplies, fuel, crew, and luxury goods. But what I wanted to draw special attention to right now is that I never specifically ruled out weapons found during exploration. I remember seeing some comments for earlier videos that may have misinterpreted this point, so I wanted to offer some clarification and an apology to those who I may have led astray with the way in which I worded things during that first episode. In addition, since we have some time here, I thought I might go a little deeper on the reasons why I came up with this specific set of rules for this campaign. So I chose to make it a salvage-only campaign because it's something that I do quite often, but I haven't seen any other content creators here on YouTube doing anything similar. So I wanted to offer something new to those of you out there who hadn't tried something similar yourselves and wanted to see what it might be like. On the other hand, I have seen others align themselves with the pirate faction, but it's something I haven't done a whole lot myself. By marrying these two ideas, my intention was to bring something novel to both you, the gentle viewers out there, and to myself so that I could remain engaged in the gameplay as the series went along. The reason why I only wanted to allow the recovery of ships from post-battle salvage is first and foremost because of the tutorial. For those of you who haven't played the tutorial or don't remember it, one of the things you're tasked to do during the tutorial is to salvage a group of derelict ships in Galatia. The reason this matters is because, as far as I know, as long as you don't have any mods installed that change the configuration of the core worlds, those ships will always be there whether you played the tutorial or not. So even though we're playing as the pirate faction with the Nexerelin mod, If we go to Galatia and look out just past the orbit of Tetra, those ships will be there. And several of those ships, including a Hammerhead, Condor, and Dram, are guaranteed to be salvageable. Therefore, if salvaging derelict ships was allowed, I would immediately have gone to Galatia to get those ships from the tutorial. And we would have been able to skip the first several episodes of this series. Call it roleplaying if you like, but I really prefer the perspective of starting from nothing, building the fleet up from our victories, and having every addition to our little pirate band feel earned. So why allow salvaging weapons from exploration? Well, the intention was never to lessen the challenge by allowing this. In fact, if you've been paying attention, you'll have noticed that we haven't even had the opportunity to salvage any weapons from exploration. And outside of hunting for research stations and completing missions for ARRGH, I don't suspect we'll even have much cause to leave the core worlds. However, there is one specific instance in which being able to salvage weapons found while exploring will matter. Those of you who have completed the main story may know what I'm talking about, but for those who don't, I won't spoil anything. So there you have it. Salvaging weapons from exploration is allowed because there's one specific thing that I want to get, and I don't want to have to break one of my own rules to do it. Alright, well, for those of you who've just been listening along while attending to something else, or just enjoy the sound of my voice layered over deep space war crimes, let me catch you up on what we've been doing. So we spent a few days in the black hole system and didn't find any research stations, but there were a few domain error probes, one of which pointed us to a survey ship in a nearby system. So we went to that system, surveyed some planets, found the survey ship, and we just finished taking out the defenders. With those drones out of the way, we're free to see what goodies the survey ship had. And that's not a bad haul. So there's a beta AI core, and also a fullerene spool, which is one of the new items added during this update. That'll come in handy if we ever decide to have any colonies of our own, as it provides a nice bonus to accessibility. And we're going to check the debris field again, just in case our chronically incompetent recovery teams happen to miss anything the first time. And despite much beating and berating, they always do miss something. I swear, if I threw a recovery team out the airlock, half of them wouldn't come back because they weren't able to find themselves. Alright, well that constellation evidently didn't have much else to offer us. So I decided to head back to Galatia so we could meet up with our good friend and Persean Magazine's sexiest man alive, ARRGH Sebastian. And on the way back we encountered nothing. Well, I lied. There was one small scavenger fleet that a hyperspace storm flung halfway to Andromeda. Anyway, we're here at Galatia now, so let's see what ARRGH wants us to do this time. Hey ARRGH, found that probe for you. You got any more suggestible rich kids for us to corrupt? No? That's too bad. Oh, but you want us to buy something off some Pathers? Why, you sly fox, you. I know your tricks. Alright, you twisted my arm. I'll do it. But just for you, buddy. Oh, and some more probes? Yeah, sure. We were heading that way anyway. Oh, and you wouldn't mind if something should happen to that Pather once we're done, do you? You know, 'cause this is our first time heading into church space and, well, let's just say I had something special planned. Well, as you may have overheard during our conversation with ARRGH, we'll be picking up something from Melodic Path Agent on Tartessus. And I think this may be our first time heading to a colony belonging to any of the major factions, which gives me an idea, because Tartessus is not particularly well defended. And being ever mindful of our time, I wonder if perhaps we can get some raiding done while we're there, just so the trip isn't otherwise wasted. Of course, we don't have any Marines to work with at the moment, and the nearest pirate base that is likely to have them in any substantial numbers is Karis. So let's head over there now to pick some up, and we can stock up on supplies and fuel while we're there too. The other missions that we picked up from ARRGH involve checking out some things around the same area of space that we just came back from, which is a little bit regrettable because it denies us the opportunity to find anything new out there. But at the same time, we are already quite familiar with that area, and that'll hopefully help us to expedite the process. I'd also prefer not to have to wait for ARRGH to find us something new and more exciting to do. As I mentioned before, I do want to move through the main story with some speed so that we can start doing things like invading planets that might otherwise break the quest line. Alright, so we've sold off some of our crew, though we still have a few hundred more than is needed to maintain our ships, so we should still be able to absorb any combat losses that we take. And that's to make room for 300 Marines, which I think should be enough to handle any ground defenses we encounter. We've also picked up some extra supplies and fuel. The fuel is particularly important in this case, as I do intend to perform a tactical bombardment ahead of any raiding that we're going to do. I also added the Squall missile launcher that we got from one of our previous engagements onto the front of the Conquest. To free up enough ordnance points to do that, I did have to remove the Flux Distributor hull mod. But that should be okay now, as the field repair skill did help us to remove the faulty power grid demod a few months ago. But while I was droning on, look what we found. A Persian trade fleet with heavy armaments. I did say I would ignore most trade fleets, but it would be exceptionally unpirate-like for us to ignore an opportunity like this. And it doesn't even look like they want to find us. Well, that's okay, we don't have to fight. Just leave your ships in park and form an orderly line in front of the airlock. That being said, they do have some combat capabilities, so I'll still send out the whole fleet just in case. In particular, we don't currently have any carriers, so that Heron might make a nice addition. Also, now that we have the Conquest and our maximum burn speed is 18, it might not be too bad to add a Colossus to our fleet as well. They ordinarily have a burn speed of 7, but with militarized subsystems and our navigation skill, they should be able to keep up. Speaking of carriers though, I had heard around the community that they're weaker now than in previous versions of the game. Not being a player who relied particularly heavily on carriers either now or in the past, I can't say I have a particularly strong opinion on the matter. But what about you guys? Do you like using carriers? And if you do, have you noticed any significant differences? What changes do you feel like the update has made to the way in which you use carriers? And do you feel like having a few of them in your fleet is still a viable strategy? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. I did also have a chance earlier to read the blog that Alex, the developer of Starsector, recently posted. In case you haven't had a chance to see it yet, it's a decent read, but in summary, he details a few of the changes he's planning to make in future updates. The most significant of which is the way in which low-tech ships will deal with their burn drive active ability. So at the moment, burn drive provides a large bonus to speed for its full duration, but in the future it'll be possible to cancel burn drive early, so you don't move farther than you want to. I think this is a really welcome change, as it helps to solve a conundrum that low-tech ships often have, which is that if they neglect to use their burn drive, they struggle to keep up with or catch up to midline and high-tech ships. But if they use their burn drive ability, then they become significantly overextended and easy to pick off by their more nimble counterparts. So the ability to cancel early really gives them a lot more precision about exactly where they end up. And along with this change, Alex also previewed a few new low-tech ships, which should also help to give low-tech a more prominent place in people's fleets. Of course, none of this will happen until at least the next hotfix. And speaking of that, I do intend to keep this campaign as up-to-date as possible. So as much as the mods that I currently have installed will allow, I'll keep the game updated to the latest version that is available. Well, we're just about wrapping things up here, I think. Unfortunately, it does look like this Colossus will get away. An oversight on my part, but not a tremendous loss. I'll just have to remember to address the crew afterwards, feed them something along the lines of, we have to let at least a few of them get away to spread the word about our daring deeds. Yeah, that should keep the grumbling to a minimum. Alright, time to see what we got. Will we get the carrier? No, unfortunately not. But we can get a Colossus, and I think we will. We're going to be taking on bigger and bigger targets, and we're going to need something to hold all the goodies we find. Speaking of goodies, wow, that's a nice haul. We're even going to have to eject the metals just to make room. And we're still over capacity, but not by too much, I think we'll manage. Let's immediately head to Umbra to drop this off before we carry on. Okay, we've sold off the spoils from the last battle for a nice tidy profit, some of which went towards restoring the Colossus that we salvaged. And as planned, we put militarized subsystems on the new ship so it wouldn't slow us down. as well as expanded cargo hold so it can carry more things. A quick check over the rest of the fleet shows that we only have one demod left on the Conquest and the Eagle. And along with our fairly healthy savings, I would say we're in a pretty good position to pick up another cruiser or two should the opportunity arise. Just gonna do a quick check to see where Tartessus is right now, as I do intend to do a transverse jump into the system. While I'm not too concerned about our chances against any patrol fleets, I would prefer to engage the orbital station with full combat readiness if at all possible. And very luckily for us, there are no patrols here, so we should be able to engage the orbital station without any distractions. Of course, we still have to pick up this piece of tech first. It wouldn't do to blow up our contact before we had a chance to talk to her. Alright, and now she is expendable. Just gonna take one more quick look around. Yeah, I think we're clear to engage here. I'm always a bit apprehensive to bring anything too small to fight a space station. Stations have incredibly long range and a ton of damage, and the AI isn't always a good judge of how much lead time is needed to back off without getting hurt. That being said, I'm still going to bring the Omen along to cover my flanks, as being disabled while face to face with the space station is really not a good look. I'm also going to set some waypoints for my other ships that are close but not too close. I'd like them to stay in range, but not get so overzealous that they start taking damage. We also don't want to be the first to engage here. For example, if the Falcon can draw away the space station's attention, we should be able to avoid that first wave of fighters, and perhaps find an opening to start attacking the station directly. We're still taking a lot of fire here, so I'm going to have the Conquest come in, and hopefully get those guns trained on a bigger target. Okay, good. We've been able to close with zero flux buildup, so we should be able to have a pretty good exchange with this hangar module. The hangar modules have a lot less firepower than the main gun module, so as long as we can match our rotation to the station and avoid being disabled, we should be alright here. The module's almost down, but we're dangerously close to overloading, so I'm going to drop shields here. Crucially, I'm not seeing any torpedo launchers on this station module, so we should be able to take anything it throws at us. Okay, great, and now we'll back off to vent a bit before we take on the next module. Against a tier 1 station like this, the first module is always the hardest, because the station can still fire in all directions, so the only safe place to be is out of range. But with module down, you can simply shift into the firing arc of the dead module and be fairly safe. Alright, 2 down, 1 to go. Let's get in there before the cruisers start taking a beating. Never mind, too late. One thing that helps to take down these heavily armored targets faster is to focus on just one spot. If you spread your damage over a wide area, then you spend a lot of time breaking through armor rather than doing damage directly to the hull. Nice work, that's our first space station dealt with. And some decent loot to go with it. Alright, time for some proper pirate mischief and mayhem. And try saying that 3 times fast. So we're going to start with a tactical bombardment, and that should hopefully weaken their defenses a bit. And now we're finally ready to do some raiding. Let's see what we're up against. Well, after several minutes considering our options here, I finally settled on just going for supplies. We'll get a fairly good return on our efforts, and the risk of casualties is not too egregious. Alright, not too bad. We lost about a third of our marines. Let's see what their sacrifices bought us. About 1,400 supplies. Well, that's not worth quite as much as the trade fleet that we took out, but still a very good haul. Now if we can just get some fuel, we should be well supplied for the jobs that Alvis wants us to do. But I think that's a task we can save for next time. So until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you out there in the sector.